Thank you, everybody, for your patience this morning, and welcome to the second series of our fall digital repository series. Today's webinar is going to be a update on the DuraSpace flagship open source repository platform. There are some new releases being that's going to occur later this year with Fedora in late 2009 and DSpace sometime next month. We're going to be joined by presenters Chris Wolfer and Brad McLean for an overview of the current Fedora and DSpace development initiatives and community updates. Today we'll be joined by Chris Wolfer, who is the technical lead and developer of DuraSpace. And Chris has been designing, developing, and supporting various forms of data management and publishing technology since 1995. Chris developed Hewlett Packard's first customer support website publishing technology in the mid-90s and worked as a document management consultant to Sun Microsystems in 2000 and has been working on Fedora and related open source software since 2002. We'll also be joined today by Bradley McLean, CTO of DuraSpace. Brad has been a long-time open source contributor, most recently the technology director for the DSpace Foundation, and Brad has also served as the chief system architect for Constant Contact Inc. and CTO of StudentUniversity.com. In past digital information-related work, he contributed to both the knowledge site and web spheres products of Silver Platter Information and was an active participant in the development of Z39.50. I'm going to turn this webinar over now to Brad. Brad, take it away.
Thanks, Corinne. Welcome, everyone. As mentioned by the operator, you will certainly have an opportunity for questions at the end, but if you're so inclined, you can also type them into the chat while we're speaking. We may not respond immediately because we'll be thinking about what we're saying, but we will try to get you answers by the end of the session. So, without further ado, then, a couple of slides to talk about the DuraSpace organization. The DuraSpace organization is a new combined organization that was built by bringing together the products and employees of DSpace and Fedora. After about a year of working on the process, our operations began in July of this year, and we act as an umbrella for digital preservation software, including our current open technologies, which are the DSpace turnkey repository system, the Fedora Commons repository system, the Mozilla Triple Store, and the DuraCloud cloud computing pilot project. Now, as befits an organization of our type, we have a mouthful of a mission statement at the moment. DuraSpace provides leadership and innovation in service to global communities who manage, preserve, and provide access to digital resources upon which are formed our collective intellectual, scientific, and cultural heritage. If that's not enough of a mouthful for you, you're welcome to go find more information on us at our DuraSpace.org website, or to follow us on Twitter as Twitter@DuraSpace. Moving right along then into the DSpace portion of the presentation, I'm going to give you an update on the upcoming 1.6 release of DSpace. After I finish that, Chris will be giving you an update on upcoming releases and processes in Fedora. DSpace is the turnkey institutional repository solution that DuraSpace provides. DSpace uses a decentralized development model. We have a committer team, and out of that committer team, we choose a release manager for each release. For the DSpace 1.6 release, that function is being performed by Stuart Lewis at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And for DSpace 1.6, we have a major rework of the documentation, including restructuring, rewriting, and hundreds of errata fixes. And so that merits a special mention of Jeffrey Trimble from Youngstown State University in Ohio in the U.S., who's been spearheading that effort, and we expect to have a much more substantial set of documentation for 1.6 than in immediate past releases. So, speaking a bit about the release cycle for DSpace 1.6, at the time we began talking about it, it was the post-DSpace 1.5.2 release, meaning that we thought it might be the next point release, as the community looked and saw that we already had pending patches that needed database changes, it became clear that we were going to need to do a version bump, and so that's how 1.6 came about. Once we realized that we were going to do a version bump, that opens the possibility for getting new features added in that require other database changes, and so we issued a survey to the community in order to get a sense of what they were interested in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Once we had a sense of the features, we then set a goal to release for the DSpace users group in Gothenburg this year. That's coming up in 2 weeks. And based on that, we then have gone and worked forward on both the features that were explicitly requested in the survey and a host of others, and we're hoping that we will be on track for that release. It's always a balance of features versus time, and one other thought to add is that we're going to be discussing at that users group and with the community as a whole what to do post 1.6. We don't know whether it's going to be 1.6.1 or 1.7, but we'll start to figure that out shortly. So we held a survey, and very quickly we got 3 top requests, which were for better statistics, an embargo facility, even though there were existing embargo facilities out there as patches, they weren't integrated into the main DSpace release, and for better batch metadata editing. As you can see from the tag cloud on the bottom right there were a number of other areas that were of interest, but for these 3, we chose 3 point people from the community to drive them forward. Mark Woods on statistics, Richard Rogers on embargo, and Stuart Lewis picked up batch editing. I'm happy to say that all 3 of those features are being addressed in DSpace 1.6. For statistics, the user event model work, which was done as part of DSpace 2, was backported to DSpace 1.x. The organization at Meyer is in the process of contributing their Solr-based statistics engine, which will be integrated and shipped as part of 1.6. And we're anticipating that we may have some additional functionality that gets added on in a future release, in a 1.6.1 or a 1.7. For 1.6, out of the box, we think we're going to be able to capture all of the types of events that folks will want to have for generating statistics. However, we expect that there'll be some refinements in the reporting and the output of them in future releases. Embargo, I believe, is going to be checked in later this week. It has been complete for some time and being tested by other users and having its documentation written. And finally, the bulk metadata editing has also been written and committed and will be available both as a set of command line tools and as web interfaces within the JSP UI and the XML UI or Mannequin UI. So it's an example of us attempting to have true feature parity across all of our interfaces, and will be available on all of them. Other features that we are adding as well. From the Open Archives Initiative, we're doing both the protocol metadata harvesting and the object reuse and exchange so that your DSpace systems can be harvested by other systems. For the community administrators, we now have the ability to delegate administration within a community and inheritance down to the collections of items in those communities to an administrator. So operations that once required a DSpace administrator to handle can be handled by the designated administrator for a given community, and as well, that administrator can perform any operations on anything that's within that community in the collections of the items themselves. For Creative Commons licensing, we now have an option to set the legal jurisdiction, a small but important change, and for item update, we now have a command line tool that's available to do both batch updates of metadata and of disk screens themselves. So that provides a useful place to build scripts and other automated technology. Continuing on features that we've added in DSpace 1.6, the item exporter and importer has been updated updated to allow zip files both on the way in and out. And in addition, on the way in and out, you can now specify the primary zip stream. So you don't have to do that as an additional operation anymore. If you set up templates for a particular collection, the Mets ingester will now pay attention to them, so you can then ensure that you're applying the metadata standards associated with that particular collection in the Mets ingester. While we've been in process, we've actually addressed, I think as of this morning, it was 87 or 88 features, of which about 65 of which have features and issues, of 65 of which are complete to date. I mentioned 10 of them up above. A couple of other feature requests. Support for open search syndication should make it into 1.6, and authority control, which also allows you to control the pull-down options within the user interfaces. So you can either choose to just apply the authority control, or you can specify to have the user interface restrict on the pull-downs, or you can apply both for the metadata. In addition to those, there are 21 other general improvements we have slated. The JIRA is up and available, and I'll give you a link to that a little bit later if you want to see the details of them. We've got about 6 of those finished, and we've got about 45 bugs, most of which have been squashed. There are 4 left to go, but as we continue the process, there will probably be a few more that will sneak in, and we'll try to get them all addressed before 1.6 goes. So when is 1.6 coming? Well, we're going to be assembling the code over the next couple of weeks. So there's expected to be a beta release available for the DSpace users group in Gothenburg. There's a very good chance that there'll be disks to be distributed at that meeting, and of course there'll be downloads available for people who aren't making it to Sweden. Once we've gotten that out, we will have various members of the community testing it, and we'll assess what we feel the status is and designate which issues and bugs we think need to be addressed before we can really call it a complete release. And so that means that the final release date, as is often the case, is to be determined. A good guess, perhaps mid-November. Hopefully nobody will hold me to that strictly, but that would be consistent with about the time period that we've run in the past between our betas and our final releases. And as soon as we've got that release out the door, it's going to be time to start talking about the next release. And so we're actively starting the process of looking for a release manager for the next release. I'm sure there are a few of our committers on this call, and so as always, we're looking for you to step forward if you feel like that's something that fits into your schedule over the next 6 months or so. If you are interested in more information, there's lots of detail in our issue tracking JIRA. If you, in point of fact, wanted to vote for issues that were of interest to you, you can do that there as well. If you're interested in more information on the software development process, you can take a look at the link at the bottom of the slide. So as I mentioned at the top, I'm happy to take questions in the chat, or you can hold them for voice at the end of the presentation. And at this point, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Chris Wilper, who is the tech lead and longtime developer of Fedora. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Brad. So today I'll be giving an update on the Fedora software development that we've been doing recently. But I wanted to start out by talking about some of the community changes that we've had in our development community. So as some of you probably know, Fedora started out as a project between the University of Virginia and Cornell, and it was a pretty tight-knit development community between those 2 institutions. And as we opened up, we allowed patches in from the wider community, and it really started becoming much more distributed, especially with the forming of the DuraSpace organization. So I want to talk about where we're at today with the Fedora repository team first. This is the team that historically has been responsible for the core repository service. So this is the thing doesn't necessarily have a UI, but people develop tools and utilities on top of to present their real repositories to users. We're up to about 8 active committers, and that's actually up from our historical average, which is a good thing. And we've had several dozen contributors in the past, folks who contribute software but don't continue on developing code. Recently, we've had some discussion about how to further decentralize our community and make it so that it's really not dependent on one institution to bring everything together. And we identified that it was key to put together some community roles where people could fill these roles in the project without necessarily being part of the DuraSpace staff, but possibly part of the Fedora development community. So the first and I think most important role that we've identified is something that actually DSpace has been doing for some time, and that is identifying a community release manager. So this is someone who's a committer but is not necessarily funded by the central organization to do this work. And traditionally that's actually been me. So this role involves scoping releases out, setting dates, making sure things get completed, and just generally driving the process. We've also talked about a couple roles which I think we could actually open up to a wider group of folks who are interested in helping, and that is an issue and documentation gardener. So again, traditionally the issue gardener or driver has been me, and that is the person who looks at our issue tracker and makes sure that the developers get a chance to see everything as it comes in and decides whether is this something that we consider open for the purpose of some future revision of Fedora, or is it out of scope, and then ultimately deciding whether it goes in releases or not. And then we have a documentation gardener, which is not necessarily a developer position at all, but somebody who's familiar and has installed and used Fedora. And we're calling these positions gardeners really because in the spirit of our wiki maintenance, we're just recognizing the fact that this is an ongoing process, and you really need to take care of and feed these things or they get stale. So these aren't one-time roles, these are definitely ongoing positions. Also, our governance model has been maturing a bit. So we're also modeling ourselves after the Apache Software Foundation model, where you essentially have contributors and committers, and contributors are folks who donate code to the software, and if their code is of high quality and the committers feel like they trust them to do good work in the future, they become invited committers. And so that's actually what we've been doing with the past couple people we've added on to the Fedora committer group. We also use the Apache model for, God forbid we get into any really difficult technical conundrums, if it does come to a point where we have a lot of disagreement among the committers, there's a process for resolving that. Now it turns out that most of this is just rough consensus, and that's how we prefer it to work, but having a model for resolving those kinds of conflicts is a very good thing. So we're doing that. We've got a lot more detail on how our repository team works at the URL below, and I think these slides will be made available afterwards, so folks don't have to remember that. We also have something that's forming right now, and we'll be hearing more about it in October, and that's what we're calling the Fedora Create community. And this is really a group of developers and software authors who put together software that works on top of Fedora. So historically, we've had quite a lot of these software products that are out there and they find Fedora to be a good fit in their overall repository architecture, and they develop a tool on top of it and share it with folks. The thing that this community is going to try to do, or this effort, is to try to bring those people together. So it's really, in the past, been folks have found it and kind of gone off and done something interesting, and maybe they've shared it with the wider community and maybe they haven't, but ultimately it's been kind of a feeling of you're on your own. And the attempt with this community is really going to be to try to bring those folks together and talk to each other and see maybe what kinds of things they can cooperate on to build on top of Fedora. So we have a well-trusted member of our community acting as a steward for this initiative, and he's just starting things up. He's actually putting together a wiki space right now in preparation for the unveiling of this community, I think, next month. So be looking for that on the Fedora mailing list. So on to software releases. We have a release of Fedora planned for December, and as with what Brad said, that's equal in my case too. That's similar. So that's the best guess at this point. We're going to shoot for December. It may take a little longer, but that's about what it's looking like right now. And beyond the technical achievements of this release, I just want to point out that this is, I think the big thing with this release is an important milestone for our project, which is really having a community release manager drive the process of getting Fedora 3.3 out. So in some earlier discussions, we talked about maybe we would do that in future releases after 3.3 goes out, but I think we're actually going to be able to do this. We've had a couple folks voice their interest in fulfilling this role, volunteers, and they're well trusted by the committer community, so we're going to go for it. So as far as the technical focus up to this point, several of the items that have been worked on have been actually contributed by the wider community or some of our newer committers. And the first is ingest flexibility. So I'm just calling it that, but this is really the ability for Fedora to load in files into the repository that are on your local system in a much easier way than has been done before. In particular, if you have very large files, it's useful to not have to send them over the service interface to Fedora. It's quite a waste of time and bandwidth. So this contribution was actually someone identified that this was useful in their environment and contributed a patch back, and then one of our committers rolled it into the trunk. We also have a big one that folks in our user community have been looking for a while, and that is a feature we've been calling RelsInt. And just to give a little bit of background, Fedora allows you to express relationships between digital objects. And like a lot of repositories, a digital object is really just a container for a bunch of stuff. Well, the internal relationships feature, RelsInt, allows you not only to do what you could do before, which is draw relationships between objects, but it allows you to define and index relationships between the components of those objects. So imagine you had a digital object that contained metadata and content, and you wanted to draw some sort of relationship between those to say at least this is the metadata about that content, or something even more sophisticated. So you should be able to do that with Fedora 3.3, and that's in trunk. Another big piece is something that users won't see right away, but this will ultimately help developers do their jobs more effectively, is our work to migrate Fedora's build system, our software build process, to a very popular framework in Java called Maven. A lot of software projects have done this. I think DSpace started this a while ago too. And we just recognize that's the way of doing things these days. It's going to take a little effort to get there, and we've certainly worked through it. And so as of Fedora 3.3, that will be the way of building Fedora as well. There are several items that are, the actual list is quite a bit larger than this, but I just wanted to touch on a few of the big ones that are to be done for 3.3. So one of them is what we're calling FESL, and that stands for the Fedora Enhanced Security Layer. So this is a project led by Mark Leggett at University of Prince Edward Island to improve Fedora's authentication and authorization modules. So this is actually based on some prior work to sort of investigate this. But the interesting thing about this project is the way that the effort was brought together was essentially pairing up people who wanted this capability with people who could do it. And it wasn't just a one-to-one. So Mark actually helped go out there and find folks who were interested in this feature and also find developers who could do it and put them together. So that's a good example of a creative way to have the community kind of come together to put things into future versions of Fedora. So that'll be coming in Fedora 3.3. We also have, for anybody who's used prior, particularly Fedora 3.2, there were a couple things included in there that we included with sort of caveats around take a look. I mean, this is a way for us to get a lot of eyes on these things, but we didn't want to switch to using the web admin UI as the sole way of administering Fedora for a release until we had people get an opportunity to take a look at it and check it out. So the effort with 3.3 is to take that and really finalize it. So there are a few pieces that are missing, but ultimately we'd really like to be in a position where we can formally deprecate our old administrative UI. So I should mention for folks who aren't familiar with this, that this is in contrast to an older admin UI for Fedora that was a Java-only client. So this makes it actually quite a bit easier to start administering a Fedora repository. Akubra is in a similar boat. So we released Fedora 3.2 with Akubra included. And with Fedora 3.3, we'd like to make that the default storage abstraction. So this is really just an effort to improve the pluggability of the back-end storage in Fedora. It enables things like multiplexing, so sending big files to some places and sending smaller files to others, but also just generally plugging into storage systems that already do that work, like hierarchical storage. Or one example we'll be working with is the DuraCloud plugin. So as part of one of the DuraCloud pilot projects, we'll be putting together an Akubra DuraCloud plugin that allows you to use Fedora and then back the storage with DuraCloud. So that'll be an option. In addition to being able to store things locally, you can back it up in the cloud. We also have several bug fixes, and I won't go through a big list of them, but I should mention that probably one of the most significant is around the REST API. So this was an effort to basically formally turn Fedora's, what we were calling the Fedora API Lite and API M-Lite, into a really RESTful API. And that work isn't really completed yet. So there's pieces that need to be wrapped up still with that, and a couple little bugs. But really, the theme of all the things is pretty much finishing up what we started. And then I want to talk a little about the future of Fedora, where we're looking for the future. So ultimately, we're really trying to position Fedora to be very much community development friendly. And part of that are the social changes we're making to ensure that we have key members of the project coming from a wider community. But another part are technical changes. So there's a framework that's gained quite a lot of popularity in the Java community called OSGI for modularity. And we've decided to move in that direction for Fedora's internal modules. So this, while it isn't an end-user facing feature in itself, is actually something that's quite important. I feel to evolve Fedora in the right way and with the right amount of flexibility in the future. So as I mentioned, it's a standard. It's gaining a lot of acceptance and adoption in the wider communities. In particular, folks who use Java know that Eclipse has used it for some time. Apache Sling has adopted it. The Sakai project is adopting it with their K2 architecture. So we're seeing all this movement and acceptance of OSGI, and it seems like the right direction for us. So out of the, we feel like we'll get a better way to extend, evolve, and embed Fedora. So I mentioned, being able to sort of position ourselves to be community development friendly, and I think that's part of it is having a modular architecture that's defined by a standard and making sure that folks can plug in without having to understand the whole system at once. And then embedding Fedora, so OSGI allows us to actually wrap Fedora as an OSGI bundle and allow people to use that as an application or as a piece of a bigger application, but not necessarily deliver it or expose it as a service itself. And then we imagine there will also be a lot of opportunities, because we use this common framework, to share functionality across several of our software products, and that includes DSpace. So we've got kind of an eye towards that in the future, and have talked in the past about how, if we were using a common framework for our modules, that we can probably leverage a lot more work between the repositories. So what we've done so far on OSGI, summer was mostly thinking about what kind of direction we wanted to take in implementing OSGI, and we investigated Spring DM, which is one approach that we really prefer. And this fall, we've been consulting with OSGI experts, so folks who've been sort of battle-hardened, and that includes folks at the Sakai project, since we've got good connections with them, and also going to various conferences where some of the industry leaders are, where they are talking about pitfalls and opportunities with OSGI. So the first goal is to get Fedora wrapped as an OSGI bundle, and actually that proof of concept has just been completed. And then after that's complete, we'll be, just in the next couple of weeks, we'll be starting the process of pulling Fedora modules out. So Fedora pieces of functionality within Fedora will be turning those into bundles. And that's likely to be a long process, and that's why I say for winter, initially we're going to be laying the groundwork and deciding how we want that to work. And then in the winter there will probably be a process of going through all the different modules in Fedora, which is not that many, but I think it takes some significant thought and attention. So again, with the date mid-2010, that's pretty much just a stake in the ground. We're aiming for a release of Fedora that's OSGI-ified sometime in 2010. So could be very different from mid-2010, but that's generally what we're aiming towards. So right now the work is around just laying the groundwork. And we have, as of yesterday, I think, we just set up this wiki to talk about it, and we have a mailing list now. I think within the next couple months, there will be bigger opportunities for folks to get involved in that process, but right now we're just kind of laying the groundwork. But in terms of getting involved in general with Fedora development, I'd like to sort of advertise this anytime I'm talking about Fedora, because we're actually quite open and accepting of new members in our community. So all of our discussion occurs publicly. I was happy to hear a couple months ago when I was at UPEI, somebody said that our mailing list was quite polite, which I thought was just a nice compliment. But we generally have a very respectful community and very inviting. So if you haven't, check out our development mailing list and participate in the discussions. We also hold public development meetings every week, and these are combination phone and IRC meetings where most of the committers will be there, and we also have folks who are contributing or thinking about contributing, listening in, and participating. And those meetings are actually recorded, and we make those available on the wiki also. And pick off something. It doesn't have to be anything huge, but some sort of token contribution. We've certainly got a lot of requests, and we've got a growing set of people who are handling those, but really we need help. So it's great when folks come into our community and are willing to sort of get their hands dirty and put together fixes or features that they know people want. And ultimately, if you're interested in continuing with that and contributing more directly, then it's always so. That actually concludes my piece of the presentation. I think at this point we're going to open up the floor for questions.
Thank you. At this time, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1. You will be prompted to record your name. Again, it's *1 to ask a question and *2 to withdraw your question. One moment for our first question.
While we're waiting for Brooke to queue up some questions, a question came on through the chat window. Alice Platt. She wanted to know, can you please detail DSpace statistics features coming up in 1.6?
Well, Alice, this is Brad. That's a great question, and unfortunately I can't. And the reason that I can't is, as mentioned, there's a bunch of furious work going on right now to port the Admire solar-based statistics package, and it hasn't quite yet arrived. And I don't want to promise you a feature that we run into difficulty in porting. However, in order to get you a better answer to that question, I can suggest that you keep track of either the DSpace development mailing list or ask a question there or on the DSpace IRC channel. And I think probably 5 or 6 days from now we should be in a position to give you a much more complete answer than this one.
Great, thanks, Brad. Brooke, are there any questions to that?
I am showing no further questions at this point.
Okay. We don't have any other questions through the chat window or on the line. I want to thank everybody for participating today. Our special thanks to Chris and Brad for presenting. And I believe our next presentation will be held October the 14th. And this is about Spark OA. Please go back to our education-webevents.com website to register for that. And with this, I will